Good morning, everyone. My name is Janice Mathis. I'm Executive Director of the National Council of Negro Women. This program is coming to you from NCNW, and today I am at the Dorothy Irene Heights Historic Building located at 633 Pennsylvania Avenue. I am so excited about today's webinar topic, From Great Idea to Business Enterprise. Many of us have had great business ideas, but that's not exactly the same thing as being able to operate an enterprise that is profitable and sustainable over the long term. We've got a great presenter here today to talk to us about how to evaluate those ideas, how to analyze them, how to test them to make sure that they are the foundation for a great business. He is Dr. Bruce Berger. He's told me more than once that he prefers to be called Bruce, so that's what we will do today, is call him Dr. Bruce. He is a professor of entrepreneurship at Clark Atlanta University. He leads the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center at Clark Atlanta, has been responsible for obtaining a significant grant to further the work of that institution, and we're all grateful for that, I'm sure. And so we want to welcome Dr. Bruce Berger. We also have with us someone I call the godmother of millennial entrepreneurs. She is Bonnie Wallace. Bonnie is the channel brand manager for hands-on banking, at Wells Fargo. And she's been my partner in this enterprise from the very first. And today's webinar was actually her idea, so I can't wait to hear her weigh in as well. I think she's got a few questions that she wants to pose to Bruce. So I want to encourage you, if you're not a member of NCNW, consider joining the organization. You can visit us at ncnw.org. We're also on Facebook and NCNW HQ. We have a YouTube channel, and we're on Instagram. So, Bruce, we want to hear from you. How do we take those great ideas and turn them into profitable business enterprises?
Well, if you have that answer, Janice, let me know, because that's a great question and a great lead-in, and thank you very much. I really want to thank you, Janice, for the invitation and your organization as well. And also, thank you, Bonnie. I am looking forward to having some interaction with you, and I've been a long time professor, provocateur with Wells Fargo in Houston and in North Carolina, where I send a lot of students to internships. And so I have a tremendous admiration for Wells Fargo and all that they do. And a special thank you to William McFarland, who is our technical genius and who put up with all my crazy questions and ideas. And I really want to thank you, William. So I appreciate everything you've done. So let's start off with a question. You don't have to answer it, although I do want to make one comment, because G. Sapphire Harris sent me a little note that I look too serious. And what Janice didn't tell y'all is that I'm a lawyer, so that's why I look serious sometimes. But I don't practice anymore, so I should have more smiles on my face than I do, but that's an old habit, unfortunately. So we'll have a lot of smiles when we talk about entrepreneurship as opposed to law, although there are some legal issues that you've got to be aware of in entrepreneurship, and you can get tripped up on. But we're not going to focus in on that today. So I just wanted to make my excuse why I was looking so serious, Sapphire. But anyway, the first question I'm going to throw at you, and just think about it, just noodle on it a little bit. Are entrepreneurs made, or are they born? And that's a question that a lot of research has gone into, and there's a lot of anecdotal stuff floating around the world and the internet. And this question was posed to me back in the 1960s when I was at the Wharton School, and we didn't even have an entrepreneurship course, but I had a professor in marketing who used to talk about entrepreneurship and what that meant. And he would always talk about entrepreneurs are born, not made. And that's before the advent of all this education that we've developed around entrepreneurship. And fortunately, for all of us, I'm going to answer that question for you based on over 1,000 opportunities that I've had to work with entrepreneurs, and probably that many student entrepreneur wannabes over the last 30 years that I've been fooling around with entrepreneurship after I sort of got out of the law practice. I was kidding with Janice because she's got ESQ after her name, and I'm in the 11th step of a 12-step program as a recovering trial lawyer, and so that's just a little joke that we make. But focusing in on entrepreneurship is a love of mine because I'm like you. I am an entrepreneur. So going back to my question, I'm going to tell you uncategorically the answer is yes and yes. And of course, that's a lawyer answer, but it is so true that there are some people who really are born, and I think it's just in their genetic makeup, that they can go out there as a kid, as a teenager, feel really comfortable talking to people, understand money, understand expenses and revenue, and just do it naturally. And I think part of that is attributable to how they were raised, and were they raised by an entrepreneur or entrepreneurs in their family, either in their immediate family or an extended family, or was there an influence in their neighborhood or a church or school? But the answer definitely is both yes and yes. I make entrepreneurs, and I have the great honor of having served at 3 universities, one predominantly white institution, one HBCU that's a state institution, and one now private HBCU in Atlanta, at Clark Atlanta. And so over my about 20 years of working with students, like I said, I've probably had about 1,000 students take entrepreneurship and startup classes that I've developed. And we can actually, as professors, mold that student and create that spark and light that fire. And I've seen it time and time and time again with students who are in STEM, students who have no business background, are not in the business school where entrepreneurship was always housed until probably the last 5 to 10 years. And now entrepreneurship becomes the development of a university-wide ecosystem. And we are now using all of the tools of startup entrepreneurial opportunities to invest those tools in faculty, in staff, administrators, students, all across universities around the country. You have tremendous numbers of universities now, as opposed to 20 years ago, that have maker spaces where you prototype. And it's not just for engineering students. It's for the fashion design student. It's for the media arts student. It's for the STEM student, the history student, the student who's in pre-law and has ideas. And of course, our business school students. So with that kind of brief overview and a little bit of background, I wanted to tell you that I am one of you. I have started 9 businesses in my lifetime. I have ideas in my head every day. I've had them since probably middle school, and acted upon my first idea actually in college, and did a little mini entrepreneurial opportunity in my university. And then after I became a lawyer, I worked a lot with entrepreneurs and business folks and really had the bug, and then it just ignited to the point where I was able to get out of the law and get into entrepreneurship and teaching. So I'm one of you. I've had ideas. I've had fear, and to some extent, I still do have some fear, because you never know what a market's going to do. In 2008, where I was heavily into real estate investing, you know what happened. And we never saw it coming. A few of us did, but never saw that black swan coming in for that dive. And we got killed. And yes, I lost money. and so did others. Back in 1987, I was trading in the Forex, the foreign currency market, and I got hit with the triple witching day in October of 1987 and lost money. So it can happen, and it's sort of is sobering to know that. It could still happen, but there are so many ways that you can prepare yourself for entrepreneurship and business that will give you a systemic approach and will provide you with enough resources and enough research that you're going to have a very high chance and a very high likelihood of success. You just have to be disciplined, and that's really the critical factor here. So I know some of you have ideas, and in a minute, we're going to take a poll with some questions that I thought of and see how you react to that poll. But first, I wanted to look at these discussion topics. And again, I told Janice and William that I like a free-flowing opportunity to have discourse and dialogue and hear other opinions and take questions and not just get up here and lecture. I don't lecture in school, and I certainly don't want to lecture here. When I get past this introduction, I'm not going to be lecturing at all. But anyway, let's look at what we have before us today. So I see 5 topics here. Where do business ideas come from? And that's a real interesting idea because the whole framework of ideation is something that came out of engineering and management a long time ago and has really morphed into a whole different approach today. So when we talk about ideation, we talk about a lot of different ways to develop ideas and to test ideas. The second topic, what's the difference between an idea and a valuable opportunity? That's a fantastic question. And that will be discussed. And I'm going to say that an idea is more focused around work than luck, and a valuable opportunity is more focused around luck than work. And I'll give you some examples in my own lifetime. Third topic, what are the chances that business will prosper? And of course, I just gave you a little bit of a hint that you never can be 100% sure of anything in this world except we know taxes and death. And we can't be sure that a business will take off and prosper, but the chances are very high that it will do so as long as you develop the framework and you build the right foundation, and that is critical. And you can do it with no money down. What is customer discovery? I'm going to tell you right now that of all of the systematic approaches to entrepreneurship, customer discovery is number 1 by far. It's not even close, and I'll tell you why when we talk about that topic. And some of you have gone through customer discovery, both formally and informally, and you know what I'm going to tell you, and you're going to feel it when I talk to you about that. And then finally, what resources are available, and everybody wants to know, where can I get the money? How can I do this? And there are a lot of opportunities out there. Some are stronger than others, but I will tell you, startup is a struggle, even with a tremendous idea, and especially in tech where all the investors are flocking to and have been, sitting around that table for the last 10, 15 years, it's still tough to get funding, but we'll talk about that as well. So William McFarland, can you help us out and put up that poll for me? I would appreciate that.
Yes, give me just one moment here to get the poll started.
Okay.
Okay, so people should have a poll on their screen now. And go ahead and take just a few seconds to answer the question before we close the poll and show the responses. Bruce, can you see the poll?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Great. So we've got about 60% or so of people who responded. We'll give people just a few more minutes to respond before we close the poll. We can get good data for you, Bruce.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
All right, so 10 seconds, we'll close the poll. You should be seeing your poll results now.
Fantastic. We got everybody polled, and you've closed the poll. Is that correct, William?
That is correct.
Okay, fantastic. Tremendous. Okay, so let me make a little comment about this poll. I developed these questions for this particular venue because I didn't have any idea other than what Janice was good enough to tell me what she thought you all were all about with regard to entrepreneurship. And that wasn't scientific to her own admission. But we can see here that almost half of you have an idea, but have not acted on it. And that's not surprising because when I ask this question of entrepreneurs in other venues and also students, it's usually anywhere from 50 to 75%. So that means about half of you have some other experiences. 20% of you said you want to be an entrepreneur and don't have an idea. And that's really, that's pretty typical as well. 20 to 25% come in around that. That's nothing to be embarrassed about or worried about because there are so many opportunities, and we'll talk about that as well, how to develop an idea and to experiment with that idea to see if entrepreneurship for you. And let's face it, entrepreneurship is not for everybody, to be candid about it. And then about almost a quarter of you have started the business, and we have about 87 attendees on right now. So about a quarter of you have started the business. That has become, that's my terminology, because I get it from my students every day, your side hustle. And that's about right from my experience. And I changed my original business idea, and it's usually about 10%. So you all, this crowd, and I know you're from all over, is right in line with what I see in students who are in universities, at the 3 universities that I've taught at, and also from what I see when I talk to entrepreneurship groups. So this is a great poll and a great result, and it also gets me thinking about some of the approaches that I have in my discussion today. So William, thank you very much for that poll. I really appreciate it. Okay, thank you. So could we go to our first slide, which would be our first topic? Okay, so Janice, were you going to give a little intro here? I forgot.
I certainly can. I'd be happy to. Am I on, William?
Yes, I can hear you.
Our first segment here is, where do business ideas come from? They come from everywhere. And there seems to be a limitless supply of concepts. Bruce is going to sort of guide us through where those ideas come from, and we'll get into a discussion about that. And we encourage you at any point to raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. And I believe that Bonnie may have a question for us already. Bonnie, are you there?
I'm here.
Can you get us started with a question about business ideas?
Yes, I would love to, Janice. Thank you. So, Bruce, I'm really curious. I know you've got a background in innovation, and I'm wondering how important innovation is, essentially coming up with something new to developing a winning business idea. Does it have to be new and innovative?
No, it does not. And also, a business idea can be for nonprofit as well. Probably about 25% of my students want to do nonprofit entrepreneurship as opposed to for-profit entrepreneurship. But you do not have to be innovative, and there are a lot of copycat businesses out there. You can look at Pepsi and Coke, et cetera, and innovation really is important, in my opinion, when you are in a tech space. But honestly, about 60%, maybe 70%, depending on where my venue is and who I'm working with, whether I'm in incubators or accelerators or at a university, 60 to 70% of the folks are not in the tech space with a business idea. They're in the service space, or they've got a product that they want to sell. And innovation really is not built around the idea as so much. The more is needed around the process or around how you're going to promote. That's where you have to be innovative. Because as we're going to talk about, and this is a great question, we're going to talk about what differentiates you. What is your competitive advantage? So you have to be innovative, not so much in the idea that gets you to the startup point, but what you do after that. And it doesn't matter if you're selling beauty products or you're selling an Uber app type of idea, which came about 15 years ago. It really doesn't matter. But how you innovate in the way you approach that business idea and take it to market, and how you market it, that is important. Innovation is important there. But in the idea creation, you don't have to be innovative. That's a great question, though.
And just to follow up on that, if I could ask another one, is there greater risk if the idea is new versus doing something that's already been done?
Yes, there is greater risk. And the reason why is because on the investor side, you have a lot more hesitation because you don't have a track record, and you don't have even sometimes an industry. Look at, let's just take Uber. Okay, not my favorite company because of some of the things that have gone on there, but it's one of my favorite ideas of all time. And what was the industry? Well, the industry was not ride sharing. The industry was the taxi industry. Okay. And so a new idea came along, and Kalanick had a hell of a problem getting funding at the beginning because no one could wrap their hands and their heads around this idea. And he started out shuttling people back and forth over the Golden Gate Bridge and the other bridges from one side of San Francisco to the valley. That's how he started. And people really, really said, wow, this is great. You know, I don't have to get on that Caltrain, and I don't have to go in my car, you know, but the funders were not lined up at the door. So that another great question, Bonnie, thank you. But it is tougher if you're really innovative and really new, and you're the first wave onto the beachhead, that first mover. You're going to have more difficulty on the funding side. Great question.
Bruce, this is Janice. Sometimes it seems like business ideas may come from our lived experience. I am at the airport and I've got a heavy suitcase and I wish it had wheels on it. And now you go to the airport and every suitcase has wheels on it. The idea solved a problem. How common is that? And is that something we ought to pay attention to?
It's very common. If you watch Shark Tank, the lead in from the bait in the tank, you know, the pitch person, the very first couple of sentences is how they came up with the idea. And I would be willing to bet you, and I've seen probably almost every Shark Tank, because I make my students watch Shark Tank and also another show, and I'm not plugging either one, called The Profit, Profit, which I think is the best show on TV because it's so real. Shark Tank's real to an extent, but there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes. You know, if you listen to that first introduction, the first couple of minutes, they're talking about, I was, you know, dealing with my baby, my newborn, and I was having difficulty with breast milk when I was on trips, and I travel a lot, and then all of a sudden they came up with a product, or they were picking stuff up off the floor, and they said, wait a minute, there's got to be an easier way, and an idea hit them. So it happens a lot, Janice, a lot, from an everyday occurrence. And there's tons of literature around this as well, where you go back and you read about founders and how they came up with the idea, and they just stumbled on it because of an everyday experience. Another great question. Maybe the audience has a question.
Yeah.
William,
do we have any questions from the audience?
The audience is rather shy. We do not have any questions. Please remember, guys, that on your control panel there is a question tab where you can type a question in and submit it, or you can raise your hand, and we'll try and recognize you. Let's see, we have one hand raised. Let's see if we can get to the person with their hand raised. Lisa Davis. You are self-muted, Lisa, so you need to hit the telephone handset on the left-hand side of your control panel. If you do that, we would be able to hear you.
And I just want to say that the only bad question is one that goes unanswered. So we hope people won't be shy. And it doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment.
Absolutely.
Lisa, you want to unmute yourself? If we see Lisa unmute herself, or if she unmutes herself, we'll hear her question. But if not, I guess we'll just move on. I've unmuted her, so if she unmutes herself, she'll be able to talk.
Are we ready to proceed, Bruce? You want to go to the next slide?
No, I want to comment on that second sentence there. The limitless supply of concepts waiting to be commercialized, launched, and marketed. And I wanted to say that there is a tremendous amount of intellectual property, IP, sitting on the shelf at companies all over the country and at governmental agencies all over the country. And this is something that most people do not know about. I'm going to give you two examples. NASA has ideas that have been brought to NASA over the years. Whenever they had a launch or anything, whether it was going to the moon when I was a kid or today going to Mars, they had universities and prime contractors like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, et cetera, work on research. And many of the research that NASA had done for itself by these third parties never came to fruition and is sitting on the shelf. And you can actually tap into this because it's public record. And you could look at all these ideas, anything from technological sensors to growing herbs in space. And if you have an idea or you see something that strikes your fancy and you want to exploit that idea, there are ways, and I'll talk about this when we get to resources, to do this with universities especially, or even privately without a university. So there is a ton of IP in the government. I'll give you an example that I recently had a conversation at Procter & Gamble. And Procter & Gamble has a ton of IP sitting on their shelf. And they're interested in people coming in. Now, you can't just call Procter & Gamble or email them and say, hey, I want to look at your IP. because they're not going to work that way. But they are working with nonprofit organizations. They are working with universities. If you're in Cincinnati, you could probably find it very easily. But even if you're not, there are a ton of companies around this country, Fortune 1000 companies that have IP sitting on the shelf, waiting for someone to pick it up. And in the government's case, they'll give it to you free, and they won't take a piece of equity. On the private sector, it's different, but it's very liberal. I just want to make that comment, and we're ready to go to the next slide.
Well, that is remarkable, Bruce. I had no idea that IP was available, sitting on the shelf, waiting for somebody to take it forward. That is a remarkable idea. Thank you for that. And we will go to see if we have any questions. Bonnie, let's call on you. Let's pose a question to Bruce, if you will.
Sure. Thank you, Janice. We talked a little bit about starting a business with a new idea. I'm also curious about starting a business with an idea that's not new. Can you be successful doing what others are doing?
Oh, absolutely. You can absolutely. How many? Where do you live? You live in Atlanta? Bonnie?
No, I'm actually in Buffalo, New York.
Okay, in Buffalo, New York. Ooh, that's a good one. How many good Italian restaurants are in Buffalo?
Oh, there's a lot. Countless.
Okay, and they all started with an idea, maybe off of a recipe that's an old family recipe. And I'll bet you dimes to dollars that in the next 2 years, more Italian restaurants will open up. So it's the same idea, but you may have a different twist on that idea. Not so much innovation, but a different twist on that idea. Or in many cases, over the last 20 years, especially with millennials, you have a tremendous advantage because of social media. You are very good at social media. And so you can take traditional business ideas, and by using social media and really understanding SEO, search engine optimization, you can blow away folks that have been doing this for 20 or 30 years or longer, because they're not up on that type of marketing. Does that make sense, Bonnie?
It does. And a follow-up question on that then is, if you've got a business that you want to start and it's an existing product or service that others are doing, how do you figure out how to differentiate yourself from your competition?
Okay, that is the $64 billion question. I'm going to answer that a little later, but I'm going to tell you that there's a little secret around the value proposition, which most people don't understand what that is and what it means, and also customer discovery. And if you can manipulate those two concepts and put them into reality, it's a win-win. You can do exactly what you asked. It's like when I went to law school. I hate to go back to the law, but I'm going to. I didn't really understand until I practiced law that you can know all this law, but if you can't apply it to the facts when the person sitting in front of you is a client who walks in and had some issue with some third party, if you can't take all that knowledge and apply it to the facts before you to help that person, you're not going to be a successful lawyer. Well, the same thing is with an entrepreneur. You have an idea, and even if everybody else has that idea, okay, and if you can't differentiate yourself, your market share is going to be very small, and you're probably going to go bankrupt, like 2/3 of the small businesses go out in bankruptcy, and about half of the rest of those businesses hang in for a little while longer and then eventually sell if they're lucky. So great question, but differentiation, there is a science to it, but there's art to it as well. I think I'm sorry, Janice. I just wanted to say, Lisa Davis posted something, William. How can you determine? I'm trying to read it. Maybe Lisa can get on the line.
Lisa, we're going to try you again. You did post your question, but if you click on the telephone icon, we would be able to hear you. I can read her question if you like, if you can't see it, Bruce, but I have a feeling you want to really talk with her about it.
Okay, could you read it to the audience, please?
Sure. Her question was, her first question was, how can you determine whether you should establish a nonprofit or a for-profit business? That was one question. And I think she may have had a second one. No, that was her question, yes.
Okay, so it's really up to you and what your idea is about and where your heart is. So do you want to help others and rely on grants and foundation funding to do this, or do you want to help others and be an entrepreneur in the business sense in a capitalistic system? We have a lot of millennials who don't like the capitalistic system for one reason or another, because I teach them every day, and they really want to do good for society, and they think that doing good for society is developing a nonprofit, and I agree with that totally. And I've been involved with nonprofits. I've worked at universities like the one Clark Atlanta is a nonprofit organization, and I've consulted with nonprofits, and there's nothing wrong with nonprofit. But you have to understand that the nonprofit entity is very, very different in the governance and the funding than the for-profit entity. It's both of them are still businesses from the standpoint of generating revenue, understanding your expenses, and making a profit, except the profit in a nonprofit is plowed back into the company, into the nonprofit, and you're not allowed to show a profit to the government when you declare that with the IRS. So it really depends on what's in your heart and soul, Lisa, as far as what you want to do. And there's
Bruce,
another question. I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Jan.
I just want to ask a follow-up.
Go ahead.
How do you determine if your nonprofit is going to be able to you will compensate yourself? When we say nonprofit, it doesn't mean non-revenue.
No. And that's something that a lot of folks don't understand as well. Everybody who works for a nonprofit gets paid. Okay, the only people who don't get paid are the board of directors, which you have to have a board in a nonprofit. You don't have to have a board in a business, a small business, unless you're a corporation. So when we talk about a nonprofit, everybody in there is paid a salary, and that's part of the revenue generation. And that revenue generation is going to come. Let's just take all of these places. The Goodwill has. Okay, Goodwill today is the bomb for millennials, my kids, et cetera, et cetera. They love to go there and shop, and they get great deals. But Goodwill is a nonprofit. But everybody who works at that Goodwill gets paid. Even the folks who work at the Goodwill who have mental disabilities, they get paid, and they should be paid. And so the revenue that comes into that store, and those stores which are all over the country, and they're in geographical Goodwill entities, all nonprofit, it's a business. And so they get funding that comes in the door when you buy a pair of jeans for $2 that someone else wore, and they were $85 when they bought them, or $185 when they bought them. They made $2, but that's not going to sustain it. So they have to get funding from United Way. They have to get funding from other foundations to supplement. But you're right, Janice. Everybody's going to get a paycheck, and you've got business revenue, cash flow issues that you got to deal with like any other business.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions? Audience?
I see one. How will the IT? I can't read that one. I'm having trouble undocking that. William, could you read? I think it's. I can't read the name very well either. I'm going to keep trying to undock it.
Yes. She wants to know. They wanted to know how will the IT services help our business ideas? I
How
think
will
that you
IT
mentioned. Yeah, let me see if I can unmute. Can you ask your question? Go ahead.
Hello. My question was in regards to the previous comment about the free IT services that are available from government and university institutions. So how exactly would like the IT services like help the business? How does IT incorporate into like a business plan or a business idea?
Okay, and this may be my fault, and I apologize to you in the audience. I said IP with a P, not a T. So intellectual property is IP, and that is sitting on the shelf. I did not mean IT as in technology services. I apologize.
Okay. Intellectual property, that makes sense. So,
I'm sorry.
I mean, so that can still tie into my question. It's okay. So how would that be beneficial to our business ideas?
Well, if you, it's beneficial that if you have an idea in a particular area and you start to look at IP, you may find that there's been some research done, and you may be able to take that research off the shelf and have a running start. Or we know that about 20% of our listeners today, our audience, said that they want to be an entrepreneur, but they don't even have an idea. So it's really custom made for them because they can go to an IP source and find IP ideas by reading through the catalog of IP. And I can tell you that NASA has hundreds of thousands of IP sitting on its shelf. The Department of Defense, unclassified, has hundreds of thousands IP sitting on its shelf. So you could go there and look at a particular area. Let's say you had an idea around a sensor that you wanted to use in gardening or in climate control or something like that. And you start looking at all the sensor ideas and intellectual property that's sitting there. You might find something that's right up your alley. You might even find someone who's done something that would partner with you.
Okay,
that's a great question. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, Misha Miller, would you like to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So I had a question in particular, like from a millennial perspective, somebody who's interested in pursuing entrepreneurship, but recently graduated college, are trying to become more like financially stable. Do you have any advice for those people like myself who, they have an idea, but it are kind of seeking a little bit more stability before kind of like launching out into the whole field of entrepreneurship? Because I've heard of different aspects or different experiences. So there are people who, work for a certain number of years and save up a bunch of money before just jumping in, quitting their job and jumping in full time for their business. So I would love to hear your insight on that.
That's a great question too, because there's tons of people like you. And if you're already out of school, out of college or university where there was an entrepreneurship program, and you didn't get involved in that program, and if it had startup activity, which not all entrepreneurship programs have startup activity, where you can actually start up a business and pitch your idea. and you're now out of school, like you said, what do? Well, depending where you live, but in most cities, the Small Business Administration is the first place that I would go, to a small business development center or a minority business development agency, or you could go to incubators. I wouldn't go to an accelerator, but you could go to small business incubators, or even some of the workspaces that are out there all over the country now, where you can collaborate and start to talk to other folks in your shoes or others who are in the startup mode, and find out what are the best resources in my city or my town. I'm on the board of Startup Atlanta, and we develop every year a pathway for someone who's new to Atlanta, or someone who's been in Atlanta and is new to entrepreneurship, in resources where they can go and start. And you're hitting upon one of the biggest issues in entrepreneurship, and that is getting traction. Whether you have an idea or you don't have an idea, people don't know what to do first. And I was telling somebody the other day when they came to see me about something, and I said, well, where have you been? And they said, well, I've just been doing this on the internet, learning about entrepreneurship on the internet. And their complaint to me was that they've spent $3,500 and they're still getting nowhere. And I said, well, what have you spent $3,500 on? Well, business cards, a lawyer to get an LLC, a web designer and a webmaster, and signage and various other things, and they still did not have a business model to go by. They didn't even have a business except out of their own house. They're trying to figure out what to do next, but they're $3,500 in the red. So this is alarming to me. But when you go to the resources that are available in your community, and I don't know where you are, but most communities, even small communities, have something that would give you a start, some traction. Certainly universities are great places to go, and a lot of universities are working with communities, especially in urban areas. Great question.
And a great answer, Bruce.
Thank you.
We have a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, if you want to move on to the next slide, because this thing's going to go faster than I thought. Wow.
Yeah.
Janice, you hit a home run, Janice. With this
well,
topic.
Bonnie, help. Let's see. I'm
Okay,
having
Bonnie.
a little trouble advancing the slide.
Maybe William, our genius, can figure that one out.
Do I have to be the presenter?
I'm sorry, Janice. You are having trouble. You say advancing slides.
Oh, there it
Yeah.
went that time. Got it that time. What is the difference between an idea and a valuable opportunity?
Okay, and I talked a little bit before about luck, so now I want to tell you about luck. So an idea is where, as you mentioned before, Janice, where you stumble upon something based on everyday activity or habit, and you begin to develop that idea. It's organic, and you have now gotten into the startup mode, and you follow that through, and you're not sure if that's a valuable opportunity. Okay, now let's talk about the valuable opportunity. So somebody approaches you and says, I have an idea, and I would be interested if you would like to partner with me or invest in me. Okay, and this is not anything that was planned. You weren't thinking about doing this. It just came to you, out of luck. And then you got involved in this opportunity and found that there was value in it. Okay, not that ideas themselves don't have value, they do. But you're creating that organically as opposed to a valuable opportunity. Ideas can morph into a valuable opportunity, but I happen to be in the space where I'm around, and I am an angel investor. I invest in companies. I'm around folks who are constantly hitting me with their ideas and their valuable opportunities. Many of them are valuable opportunities because they've already acted on the idea, and they need funding. They need the second round of funding or third round of funding, and that becomes a really a valuable opportunity as opposed to an idea, which takes longer, in my opinion. So I just wanted to give you my focus on ideas versus valuable opportunities, but certainly ideas can develop into valuable opportunities, no question about it. So how do you convert this idea into a business concept? And we have several questions here. Okay, what are the benefits of the product or service? How will the product be used? How is it differentiated for similar products? How will the product or service be sold? Who will buy the product or service? What's the method of delivery? So what you've hit upon here is this issue of traction, where people are sort of frozen and they can't get untracked, and they don't know what direction to go into, and panic sets in, fear sets in, and they never take that idea anywhere. And this happens a lot. And so you really have to start to think about, if I have this idea, can I get someone to validate the idea for me? I think that's the most important thing, is you've got to bounce this idea off of others. Friends and family tend to be negative, and they tend to say, what in the world are you doing? You have a job. Why are you fooling around with this? You don't have time for that. You've got 3 kids. You're a single mom, and you have a job. What are you doing? You get a lot of negativity. You can't do that. There's a lot of no, no, no. You know, when we're born, we hear no, no, no as kids. No, don't cross the street. No, don't run over there. No, you can't play with that kid. No, you can't do this. And so we get a lot of this negativity. And so as an entrepreneur, you want positivity, but you want the reality of positivity. So going to incubators, going to, again, to government entities that can help you, like small business development centers, going to the universities where there's professors. And I help people in the community in Southwest Atlanta, where we're located, which is a food desert and a very poor community. And people come in all the time, and I try to get them, if I can't help them, get them to the right place. So all of these questions are going to be answered eventually, and I'm going to show how we're going to focus in on a few, because I can't go through everything today in the time that's limited. But the most important idea or the most important concept here that I'm trying to get all of the audience to understand is to get some validation from someone in the entrepreneurial space, someone who is involved with entrepreneurship, whether they're teaching it or they are an entrepreneur, and they've done a startup, so that you can get some ideas. Now, you got to be careful. I'll talk like a lawyer now. You got to be careful when you start talking about your ideas, because people will steal them. Let me repeat that. People will steal your ideas. Okay? And you have to be careful. And I can't tell you, because I don't know every situation, but I can tell you that family and friends will steal your ideas. So how do you protect yourself? 3 letters, NDA. Okay? So what is an NDA? Does anyone know what an NDA is? A non-disclosure agreement. So that prevents someone from disclosing this idea or using this idea to in any other manner. And a good NDA has a really good punishment in there, where you go to court and it's very easy to win and put this person in a bad situation monetarily because they stole your idea. Okay, so anyway, any questions at this point based on anything that is up on the screen? Because the next slide really dovetails in how you can answer all of those questions, those 5 questions. But I'm willing to take any question right now. Anything out there, William?
Let me see. I don't know that we have questions that necessarily dovetail with what you're talking about. Let me see. Misha, did you have a second question?
Yeah, it's Maisha. So I heard you talk about the non-disclosure agreement. That's something that, I hadn't thought about because I've been meeting with people who I think can potentially help me move my idea forward. So would you say a non-disclosure agreement rather than registering, your ideas with like copywriting them?
You need both, actually. You wouldn't get you wouldn't get intellectual property, which is copyright or patent, or trade name or trademark. You wouldn't do that right off the bat. I wouldn't suggest you do that. Again, you're going to spend money. Don't throw money out there yet. But if you're gonna try to get validation from people, and they're professional from the standpoint of being an entrepreneur, they're going to expect you're going to come to them and ask for an NDA. And so that's nothing unusual. But I don't run off and trademark anything or copyright anything or get a provisional patent, which is a 1-year mini patent, so to speak. Don't do any of that yet. Anything else, William, before we go to the next slide?
I'm sorry. Let's see. I don't know that we have anything that is kind of
okay. All right.
particularly
Well,
related. Somebody did want to know, like not who issues the NDA, but I guess are there sources for trying to get a good NDA that you can use, so that you don't have to spend a lot of money for a lawyer, I guess, to do that.
Right, but most lawyers, I mean, I'll just say this, I'm not a big fan of, because I am a lawyer, I'm not a big fan of LegalZoom and some of those other internet based operations where you get these boilerplate forms, because they really, you can screw them up, and I've seen it time and time again. But to get an NDA from a lawyer, you're going to pay a couple $100, and it's well worth it before you spend any other kind of money. Yeah. But again, a lot of folks that you'll talk to will give you an NDA, and that NDA will be very standard, and you can read it even as a layperson and see where it says that, you're protected. Okay, and so I've seen this time again where you're protected, you get an NDA, and it didn't cost you a penny. They'll give you the NDA because they're interested in talking to you. They're interested in helping you.
And Bruce,
All
just
right.
to clarify, you say they will give you an NDA. You mean they, the source for validation, they, the university or Small Business Development Center?
Yes, they'll give it to you and they'll say, here's our NDA. Take it to your lawyer if you wish, or sign it. It's up to you. They're not going to force you to sign it, but again, you may want to take it to a lawyer and spend $150 to $250 and let them look at the NDA, or just give you an NDA, and they may ask you a question or two, 1 hour of their time. They may ask you a question or two. And a lot of times when you go to incubators and some of the nonprofits that I talked about with the government, the SBDCs, they have a free lawyer consultation where you can actually go and talk to a lawyer for free and get an NDA.
Well, that's great advice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ms. Brown, do you have a question related to this topic? Ms. Brown? You have been unmuted if you'd like to ask your question. You have your hand up? Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, so let's go to our next slide, and this really is the meat and potatoes slide, if you will. You know, how do we, and if you don't have to go back to the last slide, Janice, but there were 5 questions that we were talking about. And really what it boils down to is, and you can if you wish, so we're talking about benefits, usage, differentiation, marketing and advertising, distribution, and supply chain. Okay, so let's go back up to that. Thank you for doing that, Janice. I appreciate that. Let's go back up to
Sure.
that. Okay, so it's all about intelligence. It's all about figuring out at the very, very beginning, okay, at the very beginning, you've got to do research. And here's where, like the person who I talked to just 2 days ago with the $3,500 out of pocket with nothing to show for it, here's what she did not do and she should have done. And I force my students to do it. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but boy, I'll tell you, it gets you feeling either really good or really bad about your idea. And that's really good to get one of those 2 feelings. But here we have 3 areas that we absolutely have to get a handle on. So what is the market out there? What industry are you in? So one of the things that I promote specifically is doing an industry analysis. Okay, and I'm going to tell you how to do this in a minute. It's not rocket science, but you've got to understand your industry and what markets are in that industry. Okay, you have to absolutely understand your competition and who they are, and you have to understand how are they operating to the best of your ability. They're not going to tell you unless you disguise yourself some way or go in and as a customer and just start asking questions of employees, and you get a talkative employee and they spill their guts about everything. I do that all the time just for fun because I want to find out as much as I can about a business, either whether I like it or I don't like it. And employees will tell you a lot. And then you have to understand who is your customer, who's your target. So the first thing is an industry analysis, which includes the market that you're interested in. The second thing you have to do is develop a competitive analysis. And the third thing is you have to develop your target market analysis and using customer discovery, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is all about the customer. Okay, that's C. So let's talk about how do we do an industry analysis. So you can do this online, but I wouldn't just rely on what you get on the internet because a lot of it is not very real and not valid, and you want validity. So the best thing to do is to go to a library, a public library, or a university library. If you're an alum, you can even get online at these libraries as an alum. But the main thing you want to do is go to a library that has databases like Bloomberg, the Bloomberg terminals, and other databases, Hoover's, etc., and start getting all the data you can about the industry. You're going to get data that involves sales. You're going to get data that involves who are the players in the industry. You're going to get data about trends, which is really important because you don't want to get into a business that is not trending upward or is flat or is trending downward. And a lot of folks don't know that. They'll get into a business that industry is failing or falling, and they didn't even realize it until they got into it. Okay, and so performing an industry analysis takes time and effort, but it's research well spent. Okay, and it's free. You get it at the library. You go into these databases. I gave you a couple of examples. The competitive analysis is a little bit different. You should research competitors if they're publicly traded companies. Then you can go back and look at their quarterlies and their annuals, okay, their Q and K reports that they file annually and quarterly, and go back 3, 5, 6, 8 years and read about what are they doing. Maybe they're in a particular, they have a division, or they have acquired a company that is in your space, okay? Maybe their supply chain is a supply chain that you want to think about. There's all kinds of information you can get if they're publicly traded, but most of the time they're not publicly traded. So you have to put your gym shoes on, and if you're doing something local, you have to go to your competition. It's very important that you go to your competition and you become a customer, not one time, not 2 times, but 5 to 10 times. And you go in there and you write down everything you can. If it's a restaurant and they have a menu, you take a picture of that menu. Of course, you can get a lot of that on Yelp or somewhere online. But what I'm focusing you in on is a competitive analysis is more footwork and legwork than the research you're going to do. You still should do some research. If you're in an online business, then your competitive analysis is going to be mostly online. Look at these websites, understand what they're doing, understand how people are paying on these websites. Go and look at the privacy notice, go and look at the warranty notice. Understand the terms and conditions of the sale, because that's critical for how you want to conduct your business. And returns on the internet are a nightmare. So you have to test out your competition and return an item. Buy something cheap and return it, and see what the customer service and speed was like, because you'll learn a real lot of stuff that's going to help you when you define your terms on an internet-based business. Don't use boilerplate, because boilerplate can kill you. You have to customize it. But how do you learn? You learn from your competition. And then who are your customers? So this is all about the target market. And this is going to lead us to a discussion around customer discovery. But before we talk about customer discovery, we have to figure out who is your customer. Now, you're going to have a pretty good idea of your customer, but let me give you an example. So I have an entrepreneur who comes to me and says that she has a clothing line that is secondhand clothing, and it's upscale. And I said, well, what do you mean by upscale secondhand clothing? And she gave me this discussion. And I said, well, tell me about pricing, because you have to know pricing from your competition. That's why I said, understand what they're charging. Take a picture of their menu or their price sheet. Understand their charging, what they charge, how they price their goods. So she says to me, you know, Bruce, I have my pricing in my head. I said, well, give it to me. Let's go online. And I said, who's your competition? And she named 3 sites. And we went online, and she was priced right in the sweet spot of those 3 sites, and she did that on purpose. And I said, okay, so I see where you're looking. Now, who are these women? Because it was women's clothing. I said, who are they? She goes, well, what do you mean? I said, what are the demographics? And she means, oh, you mean like race and age and all that? I go, yeah. She goes, well, how can I find that out? And I just looked at her and I said, well, let me ask you, how can you find that out? Students don't like me sometimes because I don't give them the answer. I'm a little difficult on the answer, because if you give somebody the answer, they're never going to really understand how to dig. And so she said, well, I guess I could talk to some customers. Yeah, you could. I guess I could do this. I guess I could do that. Yeah, you could. And so all of this was done. And she came back a couple of weeks later and said she figured out who her customer was. She figured out, you know, the race. She figured out the age, the whole 9 yards. And it was very interesting. It was an eye opener for her. Okay. So those are the 3 things that you've got to do before you can really do anything that's going to take you past the intelligence stage, past the analyzation stage, okay? So if we can go to the next slide, because we've only got about 12 minutes left. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Okay, so there's something called the business model canvas, and the business model canvas has 9 categories or 9 concepts, and you can Google business model canvas, and you can see it, and it's pretty much the same. It's sort of generic. It came out of Berkeley and Stanford about 20 years ago, and it's been refined. But there's 3 sections of the business model canvas that are really, really critical. And the first is the value proposition. And what I want everybody to do is, if you can, is take a note right now. And my discussion around value proposition is going to be short and sweet. But basically, the question that you have to answer as someone in an idea situation or a new business situation is, what is the pain or the gain that the customer has currently or needs? If it's a gain, they need it, that you can relieve or supply. So what's the pain that the customer has now that you can relieve? Or what's the gain that the customer, they may not be in pain, but they got to get something, and you can give it to them, okay? Someone shopping for jeans, unless it's a special fit, a special size, is not in pain. If it's a special size, like, yes, they can be in pain, okay? And that's the other side of the equation. Some people can be in pain and also need a gain, okay? Give you an example. One of my students started a great business online for plus size shoes for women, size 10 and above. And a woman needed, with a size 12, 12 and a half, needed a dress shoe for an event. So she was in pain because she couldn't find, really nicely designed shoes, high-end shoes, and she needed a gain quickly because she needed to get to that event. Okay, so that's the value proposition. You have to understand, what is your value proposition, okay, and that'll tell you what your competitive advantage is. Without knowing value proposition, you can't go any further. You will test it, and I'll explain that in a second. Then you have to have your most viable product, or your MVP. If it's a product, it's going to be a prototype that you built and that you're going to test in a lab or under certain conditions. If it's an app, you're going to have to test it technologically. If it's a service, you're not going to have a viable product, but a viable service. So you're going to have to build a business model around that service. What is the service? How do you promote that service? What are the features of that service? Just like you were going to build a product, what's that service going to do for people? And how does that fit into the value proposition of pain or gain? And then finally, the most difficult thing for anybody who wants to start a business is to do customer discovery, because you cold call your target market, and you're going to actually take a survey of people, and you're going to test out your value proposition. You're going to ask questions about your value proposition. What do you think about this? Would you buy this? How much would you pay for this? Yeah, you're going to ask these questions. Is there anything that you would want that I didn't tell you I had, that I didn't provide you with as a feature of my product? Is there something I'm missing? So in order to test your target market, because you may have targeted millennials, for instance, and you may have found out when you do the customer discovery of millennials, they don't have the money to buy what you're selling. And your target is their parents, or your target is not the millennial, but the next generation above the millennial. So customer discovery, in a nutshell, is going out with a survey that you develop, and you can do this again with universities, you can do this with small business development centers, you can do this with incubators. You've got to do the customer discovery, and that customer discovery is going to be your test. Now, someone's going to ask me, well, how many customers do I have to talk to? And I'm going to tell you that there's a split of opinion here. In the lean startup methodology, you go out, and this is usually around technology and a product. You go out and talk to 5, 10, 15 customers at a time, okay, and get their ideas, and then you come back and then you re-evaluate and re-engineer your product over and over and over and over again from an engineering standpoint until you get the right product, okay? But customer discovery, not in the lean startup methodology, is something where you have a business that you're not trying to build a product around and getting feedback and doing several iterations, where you're going out and you have this idea or this concept and you're talking to people and you're asking them no more than about 10 questions for 1 minute. That's it. The 10 most critical questions for 1 minute, okay? That's all you're going to have for someone. You're going to write down the answers, just like you're going to stand there with a clipboard and you're going to write the answers down. And you're going to do at least 300 to 500 of these. And I know people just fell off their chair or they just threw their lunch on the floor. But you're going to do 300 to 500 of these discoveries in your target market. There's no use going up to someone if your target market is the 40 to 60-year-old male market. Do not go up to a male who's 30 years old. Okay. Now, your first question may be, "Hey, I'm doing a survey, and I'm looking for folks that are over 40. Would that be you?" And they'll say, "Yeah, that's me." I mean, that, you're not going to pull out their driver's license and ask them for proof. But a lot of times you're going to do a survey, and if you're not going to your customer segment, your customer target, don't do the survey. Move on. Say, "Oh, no, I'm actually 29. Oh, thank you very much. I don't want to take your time up," and move on to the next person. And it may take you several weekends to go to a mall or stand over in front of a Whole Foods before you get kicked out, or a Walmart, and talk to people, okay? And this is hard work, but this is really, before you spend any money, where you're going to find out what you have or what you don't have. Do you pivot? Do you abandon this idea? Or are you getting a lot of validation? And wow, that's heavy duty. When you get that validation, you feel on top of the world. Now you're ready to really focus in on the business model canvas. Now you're ready to really focus in on raising money and resources. So I really wanted you to have this focus on understanding your value proposition, being able to give that in an elevator pitch of 30 seconds, no more, about pain or gain or both, understanding your most viable product or your business model. And this goes for nonprofits too. What's your value proposition? Oh, you're gonna work with homeless women, single moms. Okay, how are you going to get funded? You're going to go to foundations and you're going to pitch your idea. Do you think they're just going to give you money? No, they're not going to give you money because they feel bad or they want to help you. You've got to have a value proposition for them. And if the value proposition is not in their sweet spot, they won't give you the money, because there's 50 other people trying to help homeless single moms as well, 50 other nonprofits. So what differentiates you? No different than a business, a bank, an insurance company. No different. Maybe we should, because we got about 5 minutes left, Janice, go to the next slide, which I think is the last one.
All right, we'll do it. That's great information, Bruce.
Oh, great.
This is the final slide.
Okay, so resources is really, the 200,000-pound gorilla in the room. This is really where people get a lot of fear, get a lot of rejection, and I mean, all of these are opportunities to get some resources, money, family and friends, savings, angel investors, venture capitalists. Professional consultants aren't going to give you money, but they may be able to help you to find money. Experience management, where do you find people that can help you do what you've got to do in your business model? That's really, really critical. And that's really, there's no easy answer there other than networking in the right circles. Banks, I'm just going to tell you that if you are not going for a line of credit or a loan, you don't need to waste your time doing a business plan. People want to rush out and do a business plan. You don't need it. More important is your business model. Banks today are not going to loan any money to a startup right off the bat. It would be very, very rare. I'm not saying a startup can't get money, because there are ways. Some nonprofits will give you microloans. There are lenders that will do microloans. There's crowdfunding, which is very difficult, but you can raise money through crowdfunding. The SBA does have loan programs through banks. Again, collateral is an issue, and normal guidelines are an issue. Your angel investors are your best way to go from the standpoint of getting initial capital, that initial seed money, maybe $2,500, $5,000, $10,000 to buy some product or to work on your prototype. There's also something that none of you probably know about, and it's the SBIR experience with universities and prime contractors. So all of these government agencies, Department of Defense, Army, Pentagon, Navy, Air Force, NASA, FDA, USDA, they all have prime contractors, and all of those prime contractors are looking for subcontractors. And if you're a small business, you can hook up under the SBIR program and get a lot of money, $500,000, even $1 million, as long as you're working with a university. It's very difficult to subcontract with the prime when you're brand new and you don't have any track record and you don't have the qualifications that the prime contractor is looking for and required under a government contract to have. So you're probably going to strike out there. But SBIR university opportunities are tremendous and plentiful. So I think that wraps it up. I'm trying to stay within our, William's going to kick me off here. I want to thank all of you. I wish we could take questions, but I'm going to turn it back over to Janice. I really enjoyed this, Janice. Thank you. And Bonnie, great questions. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to thank everyone involved, especially our audience. We've designed this Millennial Entrepreneur Series with you in mind. We're right up against it in terms of the clock, but I would encourage you to join us every fourth Friday. And we were going to post some of this information. I was taking notes. The presentation will be up. And if you have questions, you can continue to email us, post them on Facebook. We'll find them and find answers for them or help you find the answers. I want to thank Bonnie again. Bonnie is such a wonderful example of a banker who's got all the right intentions. We wouldn't have this program without your visionary leadership, Bonnie. Clarification and mediation, thanks for what you do for us all the time. And Bruce, you're just a jewel, and we will be calling on you again. We may do a second round of this because I think we're going to have a lot of questions that come in through the email and over the transom. Have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. This is the National Council of Negro Women from 633 Pennsylvania Avenue, the Dorothy Irene Height Historic Building.